Good afternoon and good morning to those of you that have joined us from overseas. Thank you for joining today's webinar. As always, we're just going to leave it a few seconds just to allow everyone to join us and to settle in. And if you know, if you've been on the webinars before, you know I can't really keep quiet for 60 seconds. But anyway, we'll try and give it a go. Okay, so for those of you that have joined us, we're just waiting for everyone to join and to settle in, and we'll start shortly. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We have I love these webinars because the content is great, and unfortunately I know some of the answers, so I'm a bit disappointed, but it's as I said, it's great content. So what we're going to talk about today, we have Alight joining us, so thank you, and we're talking about optimize your multi-country payroll, actionable insights from the 2023 Alight Global Payroll Complexity Index. So just to give you some housekeeping, we are recording this webinar and the slides will be made available afterwards. We always like our webinars to be interactive, so please ask questions. Marianne and JP, I think, will be answering the questions during the webinar. So let's get a conversation going. So that said, I'm now going to introduce you to JP and Marianne. JP, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So first of all, pleasure to be here, Melanie, again with you. So full name, Jan-Pieter Jansen, JP in short, and I'm leading the large deal team in Alight in this industry for over 2 decades.
Thank you. And Marianne?
Hi, Mel. Thanks again. Marianne Langlois, part of the strategy and offering management team. I've been with the company for 20 years.
Oh, thank you. Right, so I'll come off camera and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about.
Oh, JP went on mute.
I have to unmute myself now. Thanks a lot. So before we get into the details of the actual findings of the Global Payroll Complexity Index, let's take a look a bit of the background and what we try to do. So as you can see, we have a biannual survey. We did do one in 2021. We are doing today another one. As you can imagine, hence the webinar that we have. And basically, we start off to take a look on our own SMEs that are focusing around the globe and running the payroll operations on a day-to-day basis. So what we have learned, and we do that over a decade already, that this is a go-to report and research by many of the experts in the market, to identify what is happening, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the risks. So there are quite some benefits of using this top 40 Global Payroll Complexity Index in order to see what happens with my complexity as an organization. Where do I focus on in terms of what happens from a regulation perspective, what is happening from a compliance side of the house, are there specific risks that I need to mitigate? Where are the opportunities where I can potentially save costs because things have been simplified and getting more easy to work with? Or how do I perform compared with others? Or what do I do in terms of global optimization? So stakeholders we see is around the business side of the house, from C-level to HR directors or global payroll managers. We can see international talent managers looking at it. So looking at, okay, what kind of talent do I need to get on board if I want to deliver the payroll processes myself in a given country, and what happened with the complexity there. So a lot of people are using this report from different angles. So just to give you a bit of background here, and why we doing this on a regular basis. So let's move on and let's get a bit of insight on the on truly what happens from a, let's say, complexity and why. So if you take a look in terms of understanding the complexity and where it's coming back from, as you can see, it is truly to get, I would nearly say, kind of map of challenges. Where does it really play a role? What's moving around? Where do I need to focus on? But also, what are the big changes on laws? What are the big changes on regulations that is driving a longer term impact on my organization? But also, if you think about, I mentioned that before, if I benchmark myself, how do I benchmark if I also consider about that complexity changes and as a consequence, the efforts from my own organizations or my partners changes. And it helps you also, I think, from a strategic decision making. Do I go for in-source? Do I go for outsource? Do I go for co-source? What's my sourcing strategy? Where do I need to get more talent on board? And how do I move that forward? But on the other side also, where do I need to pay a bit more attention on the risk management side of the house because of the changes that we're going through? So that is why we have set up the Global Payroll Complexity Index in order to support those kind of thinking processes as well to facilitate organizations to work with that. So let's take another look on it and see what that means in a first highlight results. Now, if you take a look in terms of what happens, then what you can see actually is the top 10 countries are getting more complex, around 30% more complex than the 30 other countries. And that is kind of interesting if you think about it from an effort perspective, from a knowledge perspective. So that gives you kind of indication about what that means from you as an organization, as professionals. But also, if you think about the size of gap from a complexity perspective, from the most complex country towards the least complex country, is close to 100%, which is incredible. If you think about what that means from a professional perspective, but also what you need to have in place to overcome those complexities. What is truly encouraging, I think, from this research is that what you see is that the overall complexity decreased. And I know for some countries, there's always a long talk about can we simplify things, can we simplify regulation, and with that, reducing complexity. And I think what we see around the globe, around the 40 countries, that actually did work. And with that also, what we learned from the impact of remote working for the last years also impacted the GPCI results. So I think if you take a look behind it, what drives that reduction in complexity, that what you see is that there's a much more simplifications around tax deductions. You see a revised approach in terms of personal taxation. And we also see that more and more organizations from a own delivery perspective, so in-house payroll as well by partners and service providers, that more time, more effort and more investment has been placed in automation. So with that, there has been an increase in automation. So if you think about what that means in terms from an organization perspective, that you could say, hey, yes, there is a reduction in complexity. However, the gap between the most complex and least complex is as big as it has been, or even potentially bigger. And I think the top 10 countries driving that level of complexity is going to be an interesting challenge for all of us in this industry. Now, this has been set the scene on a more global scale about what global payroll complexity is about and about what the initial findings were from an expert's perspective. But let's take a closer look to the country levels. So I think, Marianne, you're the right person to take us through in a much more detailed level in terms of what that's mean from a country perspective and bring this to life. So over to you.
So we have about 150 people out there in the webinar now. So we want to really ask a whole question, like what country do you think is the most complex for processing payroll? And I think JP, you brought up some, and so we put up, we didn't make it easy. I wanted to cover all the regions, give everybody kind of an opportunity to sort of weigh in. If you're familiar with our survey, like you said, JP, we do it every 2 years. We've been doing it for more than a decade. You may have an inkling of who's been kind of edging to the top and how they might be outplaced, but we'll just give folks a minute or so. Mel, if you would, let us know kind of the responses coming in.
So, Marianne, I have this magic number that I like to get, so we're not too far away from it. So if you haven't answered, then please make sure you do so. I was going to say, Marianne and JP, what do you think the answers are going to be, the top ones? What do you think?
I think I would expect to see Brazil on the list. I can imagine that in Europe, I can easily see people voting for Spain or for France, and I can see a lot of people voting for the United States because they quite often see themselves as well as pretty complex. So, yeah.
For sure. I mean, they say beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Well, complexity's in the eye of the payroll processor, right? So I think everybody that's out there doing payroll feels that there's complexity. So I think that's, a point to be considered here, that all payroll is complex.
Yeah.
And the conversation here is just to have a deeper discussion on some of the things that drive complexity one year over another. So what do you have there, Mel?
Okay, so we have the magic number. If the country, if there's a country on here that you don't agree with, you can add that to chat. So if you think there's another country, please feel free to add that to chat, because we'd like to hear it. So anyway, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So can you see the results there?
Okay, we haven't fooled our participants much. They have in fact guessed the right answer. And I would say all of these are, are worthy candidates, right? For sure. So we've got, the France in the lead, followed by the US, and then of course Brazil, and then some other ones there. So that's quite interesting.
All right, I'll scroll up for you. I don't know if you can see that.
Quite interesting.
There you go. Okay, so I'll stop sharing for you.
Okay, that's great. You can close that off and then move us forward, and we'll take a look at what that top 10 does really look like. So we haven't fooled you. I'll move one more. Yeah. So France sits in the top slot, right? Followed by Germany, Switzerland, Italy. It's interesting that 9 of the top 10 are sitting in Europe. So I don't know how you want to reply to that, JP, but it is quite interesting. And then we have seen this year over year. It's interesting though, this year, right? We saw, to your point about complexity overall has gone down generally over 6%. The individual complexities, like Germany, Switzerland, Italy, they actually went up. So they became more complex, stayed in the top 10, if you will, but their complexity went up. We saw Canada hit into the top 10 for the first time, along with Turkey, Slovakia, and the Netherlands. So I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that in a little bit, about why that is. But I thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking about what's driving this. So I think the 3 things that we saw resoundingly, the feedback from the SMEs, and we said this is like a 2-part survey. This first half went out to subject matter experts in the 200 or so payroll countries that we process in, and we focused on the top 40 countries. The differentiators were really deductions. They were about calculations and reporting. That's no surprise to anybody that's in payroll. When it's interesting though, when you look at things like why, say, for instance, Slovakia, right? So if you look at Slovakia, it makes sense in one realm that they would be there because they're a relatively new country, speaking, right? 1993, they spun off from Czech Republic. And what's interesting there is that I think they're still evolving to where they want to be. And I think this is a key on complexity, JP. It's not so much that they have deductions, it's how fluid and changing it is. So for instance, when they first came out as a country, their employee and employer social insurance deductions were capped at 4% for employees and 10% for employers. In 2017, they removed those caps. And as you would expect, those numbers have gone up. So now you have a situation where in Slovakia, your employees are paying 10%, employers are paying 25% because the country needs funding. Right. So it's all interesting things. We're seeing also the level of benefits that go for leave of absence, as in maternity and even paternity leave. In some cases, and in keeping with many countries in Europe, paternity leave can be offset or funded by the government. So this gets into the reporting now. We're tracking these types of leaves within the country or within the company. I have to report that to the government and be reimbursed. So that's quite interesting. On that one. And just to add another layer of complexity, I know it's a topic you're focused on, JP, is flex benefits. If you're in Slovakia and you're 33 years old, you get an extra week vacation. Now that has nothing to do with how long you've been with the company. It's just an extra little perk. So again, not only companies, but countries can add little perks, little things that will add complexity. So I don't have anything you want to comment on Slovakia? Did you go on mute?
So on Slovakia or the Netherlands?
No, I wouldn't get to the Netherlands. I'm not picking on you yet. But just on Turkey, I would say, again, Turkey was an interesting one as well. Their payroll, while they say they're fairly straightforward, there's a lot involved with getting set up to do business in the country. You have to have multiple banking relationships set up in the country. I guess, as a country, they want to know that you're well vested in them. There's a lot of different rules around severance. Again, another theme that we see a lot. And I think there's very distinct rules. I think the saying really is, if you want to do business in Turkey, you do it our way. So I think maybe that's just people recognizing Hungary, thank you for weighing in on the extra holiday per age of the employee. It just makes it very, 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 very interesting. But I wanted to pick on the Netherlands. The Netherlands, the founding country in the EU. I mean, what's the story there, JP? Why all of a sudden are you raising your head? I mean, you're based in the Netherlands, so I thought I would give you a chance to defend yourself.
Yeah, that will be tough. So if you take a look to the Netherlands and what's happening over there, a couple of things. One is that we want to modernize the workforce market, and the government had a great idea to change the way you have to deal with severance pay or transition pay, as we call it in the Netherlands, and thought that was going to simplify things. Guess what? It didn't, because we're the Netherlands. We do everything a bit half, and leaving everybody to have some ways to have different interpretations. So basically, the whole severance pay or transition pay did create a lot more complexity for the employers as well, and from a payroll perspective. So that was one thing. The other thing is that what you also see happening as we speak is that as of 2021, you could see that the financial stress in the population did grow a lot. So there were statistics that were saying basically short-term absence, about 70% was financial stress related. So there was an appeal coming from government as well, from the unions, to have more benefits related to helping to take away the financial stress. Now, as soon as you start to be creative in that area, as you can imagine, that has directly an impact on all the process and the way you have to run your payroll. And last but not least, and that is going to create even more complexity as we move forward, we just adopted a new law around the pensions, and that's going to increase another complexity. So I think if I would have to make a prediction, I'm not surprised to see the Netherlands back in the top 10. I'm afraid that it's going to even move to the top 5 based on
yeah, I definitely think it's a theme that has to do with how rapid the changes are. And a couple of thanks to everybody for making the comments in the chat, by the way, and for weighing in on the countries that you believe should be at the top of the list. Good question about what are you looking at in the index? Well, we are taking and sort of breaking down the payroll process. We look, end to end. What are the number of data elements that are needed in payroll? What types of deductions, the level of automation, the manual processing, how much things have become automated. And, interesting, we'll talk a little bit more about this too, JP, around the impact of COVID and what it's had to do on payroll. But let's move on. I think we have another, we'll just do a quick recap as to why France earned that position. If you just move on to the next slide, Mel, obviously the high number of fields. So this is what are the things that we're looking at? The manual reporting. Okay, we saw this took a big leap for many countries during COVID because we weren't in the office. It was more difficult. It was harder to get there. So many countries accelerated their electronic reporting. These multiple ways to receive payments, right? Whether it's check, it's transfer, it could be on a card now. The frequency of legal updates. And I think this is why the Netherlands is there, is that all of a sudden you're seeing rapid fire changes that are coming in. And so it's changing the dynamic, and this record keeping, this idea that I've got to keep these records, I've got to be, very pristine in the way I do that. These add a lot of complexity to the whole, not just the payroll process, but the ecosystem around payroll and the considerations that you have to make. So Mel, let's pop on to another question here, and let's test and go into that next layer of looking at what country probably has seen the biggest increase in payroll complexity since 2021. So we've kind of given a little bit of things. So just, again, for those that are familiar with the survey, you might be able to quickly look and sort of gauge things, but just feeling, you know, from those that are in the payroll space, countries that have been out there, the biggest increases they may have seen for payroll complexity. And we'll see ask our participants to weigh in on that.
What do you think is going to be, what do you think the audience are going to suggest on this one?
I think there's a lot of expansion into the Middle East. I think that they're not exactly welcoming. Well, maybe that was just because the Olympics were there and there was a lot of foreign workers there, but I think there's some challenges there in you do business our way kind of thing. So I think there's been some challenges there.
Yeah.
JP, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. If you think about new countries, for sure. If you start to look at it more traditionally, then you very rapidly think, okay, the guys in Belgium and Switzerland are pretty complex. If you think about in Switzerland, the cantons and the different regulations that you have there. But that doesn't necessarily say that they created more complexity over the last couple.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true.
It's really about making the change. And if you think about the African countries that were pretty simple, any complexity that they add is a major step of complexity to jump into. But I'm curious about if the audience is going to pick up the right country.
And even if you took a vote, like just weigh in on why you did that. You know, like Heather's putting out there about reporting requirements. So it's interesting to see what people are experiencing. So what does it look like, Mel?
Well, can I just have my magic number? We're not near it. Yeah.
Right.
So if guys, if you haven't answered, could you just quickly jump on? There's no wrong or right answer as such. So, but definitely people preferred the other one. They wanted to know what the last poll was going to be, the complexity. So there you go. So if you can answer this, that'd be fabulous.
Okay. Patricia was, I've just noted, I saw Patricia was commenting about the Middle East. It's like one thing they'll say, oh, you know, someone will say, oh, we're expanding into the Middle East, and okay, where? And where is your office going to be located? You have to know if they're in the free work zone, or it's all of that kind of complexities that of understanding how are we going to make these payments to your employees and what other considerations. And a lot of times people know they need to expand into markets, but it's new to them, right? And they're just like, what am I waiting for? So always looking at that. Yes, exactly.
Okay. We're there. So I'm going to end the poll now. So thank you very much. Thank you for answering. And
yeah,
here are the results. Can you see the results?
Wow, it's a little neck and neck there. I think Canada, that's interesting. Turkey, United Emirates, okay.
I think Belgium's the top one, 23.
Yeah, I see.
For sure. All right, let's see what our answer is then.
Bear with me.
So we've already talked a little bit about that. So yeah, all of the ones we really talked about, Turkey, Canada, and Slovakia, they earned their position there. More or less, I think in Turkey, it was more around the level of rules, the caps, the frequency upon which those things are changing. So I think, again, they're evolving, and you can see as being that epicenter between Asia and Europe and the influences that are coming from them. I think they're hitting on all cylinders in terms of how rapid fire the changes. But Canada not far behind. I think the collective bargaining, the unions there are becoming more influential. And so I think we saw a lot of people weighing in on Canada. And then we've talked about really Slovakia just evolving and figuring out how do we base our revenue in the country and this taxes into the employers and employees.
Yeah, so just from a Slovakia perspective, Marianne, to wave in a bit, I think if you take a look in terms of the change of demand and the reporting there they had, and you see more countries, Eastern European countries, getting more and more thorough on the external reporting. Same I see in Austria, for example. So you see more and more complexity getting there from a reporting perspective, and I would not be surprised if more countries are going to have more requirements from a reporting perspective moving forward, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. All right, then let's look real quickly. This is always interesting, you know, not for the people that are in these countries, but I think we have another poll question that asks just the opposite. So what country has seen the biggest decrease in payroll complexity? Not to say that it's, you know, payroll is ever easy, but again, just putting things out there. And I would say that some of these things, just to give you an idea of what we saw, is that the level of change, again, that's coming in, maybe it's settled in, maybe the technology is encompassing more of the rules that used to be handled more manually. So these, I think, are some of the way, not that we guide people, but that we say, here's some things that you should consider in your job, right? Or maybe how this impacts complexity, right? Not just that I've had a lot of turnover in my staff, which is obviously another big piece of this too. Payroll can be hard when you have new joiners that are running your payroll group. When they say the average time it takes to get a payroll person up to speed is 5 years, 3 to 5 years, right? In terms of really feel proficient in their job, that it can always seem complex when you're just stepping into a new role like this. And I think this reporting, we talked a lot about this too in Europe, JP, this need that many of the governments cover the sick leave, like you were talking about, more and more sick leave. I think COVID impacted leaves, different things like this. You saw the states or the government stepping in and covering these costs. And so now companies have to decide how they want to. Do we get reimbursed? Do we continue to pay the employees? Because in some cases, sick pay is covered by the government. It's quite interesting.
Okay, I'm actually really surprised by what's coming up, but obviously I won't spoil it. So if we can just have another 20 seconds. So if you haven't voted, could you just humour me, please, and just vote, and then I'll end the poll in a few seconds. So thank you. Can you see the results already, Marianne?
I can't see them. No, I can't.
See them. Oh my God!
I'm just going to be surprised along with you.
Okay. Oh well, I could see the results, so I'm quite surprised. I'd like to know why, when I show the country, why people think it's this country. Be really interesting.
Okay, maybe people can put some comments in the chat.
Yeah, if you can, just out of interest. Yeah, and if you do process this country's payroll as well, that'd be really interesting. Okay, so thank you so much for everyone that's answered. This is the last poll, isn't it, for today? So
JP, while we're waiting on that, we've had an interesting comment about Poland is in top 6 in complexity. Many companies have been entering Poland to set up business hubs and entities for various reasons. Curious if there's a compromising correlation and if payroll operations have a negative impact on market entry. I mean, we know this. The timekeeping systems are, very difficult in Poland.
I think Poland, I always view as one of the more complex countries, but that's my personal opinion. And I think what you see is that I didn't hear anything talk to, let's say, the larger global companies, that there's any hesitation in entering the Polish market because of the complexity. Because there are too many advantages, I think, for entering the Polish market.
That's it.
And they take the payroll for granted. So with that in mind, and I think at the other side, it forces you quite some manual processes, as you can imagine. But I think what we will see in the years to come, I think that they will try to get more automation in. Also interacting with some of the regulations that they will adopt slightly to be able to improve that pressure will come. But I don't see any hesitation in entering the Polish market because of this.
Don't you think too, then, and this also impacts people's perception of complexity, is the type of industry that they're in, right? We'd have to talk about that too, right? Because timekeeping systems, if you've got a lot of blue collar workers, they can be really challenging. So let's just see, Mel, if you can post up the results. That would be great. The United Kingdom, wow. There's a lot of requirements there. And maybe, I don't know, Brexit, do you think people perceived that just maybe, I don't know.
If you process payroll in the UK, I think it's got more complex from the feedback, but every country will say they've got more complex. So that really surprised me. So if you did vote UK, could you just tell me, do you process payrolls in the UK? Because that would be an interesting answer.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will go back on mute.
We would say we stumped everyone on this one then, right? Or at least our SMEs that are on there didn't see this as the biggest decrease in complexity. If you just move on to the next slide, we will talk about it. Because when I first saw the slide, I thought, wow, this feels like, Mexico, Russia, Japan. But this goes back to the point that JP, if you think about it, yes, Japan has a lot of bonus schedules. There's a lot of data elements involved in payroll. Russia, I think many people have just taken them off the list altogether as a sanctioned state. And they said, well, that's not difficult anymore because it's a no. Mexico has strong banking requirements, like you must bank at this bank, you have to pay employees. But here's the thing. None of that's changed recently. So I think this is part of it where people have adopted, they understand the rules. There's not, so I would put a lot in the space of either it's been simplified in some other way or the rules haven't changed. I don't know what your gut was, but I thought when I first saw this, I said, oh, maybe we got that backwards. Maybe this is where the increase has been. When I looked at it a little bit deeper, I could see why the feedback was coming.
I would agree about that. So what you can see that there has been specific changes, and I think it's also to be said, even if you have a kind of framework in which you will value the decrease or increase of change, it's also kind of perception, and sometimes you go like, is that big? But when you start to dig in and people are starting to talk about how it's going to impact the day-to-day operations, you start to get the flavor of really why they feel that decrease of complexity is that big. So sometimes a small change has a big impact on the actual work that people perceive to be doing, vice versa. And so with that in mind, it is also, of course, just an indication about what the emotion side of it is.
Exactly. So just to wrap up, Mel, just on the last slide, and we've touched on this a little bit, just the three key drivers of complexity for us across these surveys and the things that we really honed in on had to do with the mandatory deductions. And I think this also, JP, and you touched on this in the beginning, you talked about talent and the need to really drive talent. We're seeing a much more focus nowadays. Just go the other way, Mel, on the slides if you could. Is that we're seeing a much bigger focus now on flex benefits. This is adding to deductions, right? So we want to get out there, whether, the company offers a base benefit and people can top up or add additional things. There's much more interest now in not only just the traditional deductions we've seen, but much more deductions for people to take advantage of flex benefits and different programs like that. Social Security calculations, depending on the frequency of change, it seems like twice a year is becoming more of the norm rather than just an annual event where people are changing the percentage calculations. And JP, you've already said there's a lot coming in that regard as well. And then reporting. It's no longer just, here's the stuff that came out of reporting. You've got government agencies that want new joiner information. We want people that are sending information for sick leave reimbursement. So all of a sudden, the payroll group has become the epicenter for all of this. So if you're spending time blocking and tackling just to get payroll done, you're not going to be able to deal with all these additional pieces that come in reporting.
May I just step in here, because I see in the chat a lot of discussions about is the UK more complex or Belgium versus the Netherlands? And the funny thing is, what we also do is, besides this Global Payroll Complexity Index survey, that's one piece of information that we use. We also use what we measure around the globe for about 180 countries is what's the productivity in countries delivering the services, and why is the productivity of those services different from one country to the other country, and for which activities. And so and one of the things that I can see from my role is that, for example, the productivity in the UK is much higher than the productivity in, for example, the Netherlands. Just as a sidestep, as an example, and that is not fractional, it's significantly different. So what we see is that also gives us an indication about what's the complexity and where it's causing by. Is that pre-payroll? Is that payroll processing? Is that post-payroll? And if it's post-payroll, does it sit in reporting? So we also have a lot of data available for us to validate what the Global Pay Complexity Index, if it makes sense or not. So just to highlight that it's not only this that we see, but also some facts behind it. Yeah.
That's it. So then just to hit on the next slide, just a couple of key changes. I think we talked a lot about these things. Employee-led culture, we talked about benefits, we talked about all of those pieces of it, the heightened shift on the cloud. So I think this is another area too. We all had to embrace, right, with COVID, quickly working from home, and we were able to get even legacy technologies, on-prem technologies, to do what we needed to do. Now we're back in the office, or we're trying to get back in the office. And now we're back on talking to people about migrating back to the cloud, because they realized, you know what, we were able to do it, but it was difficult and it's making it more complex. So now this big push then around a heightened shift to the cloud payroll, and then some of these other things, JP, if you want to comment on any of these, is integration between HR and finance, just integration, period. It's with everything, whether that's the end reporting, the beginning reporting, it's all those pieces.
Absolutely, and if I take a look in terms of, just go back to the remote access as an example from a delivery perspective, but also remote working. Remote working has created a whole new world of compensations for employees in different shapes and forms. So it's funny to see how those kind of things are interacting with each other from one side, from a profession perspective, at the same time from a consumer perspective as an employee. If one of the highlights that I would want to take out of here is the pay equity, because at today's world, if you take a look, for example, in Europe, there's a whole set of regulation coming on at us about what we need to do and are forced to do if we talk about pay equity, man, female.
Pay equity, and then also things like earned wage access. What does that look like? It's very well established in the US. It's coming of itself outside of the US. Any types of innovations of things that people are asking for additional functionality from their payroll systems, loans, and all of those pieces. So it's just, you've got to have best-in-class technology to be able to address all of these things.
Absolutely, and I think it was highlighted in the chat, and I think we touched on it, but I think very briefly that the digitalization level of the whole payroll ecosystems is getting incredibly. The level of automation that needs to come along, and digitalization also with the related processes. If we talk time attendance, if we talk about benefits, if we talk about travel and expense, basically what people are looking at today, that every time live event of an employee that is impacting the pay, that we have a digital support of that, and that it integrates together and getting more or less seamless. And that has going to have an impact on complexity in different shapes and forms. I'm not always sure if it's going to reduce it, but it will at least introduce a new way of looking at complexity, definitely.
Exactly. So just helping think through, what do we do with all of this? So now just moving us forward a little bit, just talk about what are some of the mitigation strategies, and we've been weaving that in into our discussion. Just one more slide forward. Obviously, standardizing and streamlining it, that's been a story for a long time, because you can't organize something that's not streamlined and standard to begin with. So that's the first thing. Integration of systems. I think it's always been a theme we've talked about. Thinking about continuous improvement. I think for companies that had been delaying upgrading to the cloud in payroll, they got caught flat-footed through COVID, and everything became more difficult. I think everyone has adopted, hey, we need to be a simpler life now, right? And that goes along with optimizing operations for efficiency and where we need to be from a technology standpoint. We need to be able to do APIs. It's not even a question anymore, right? It is quickly being able to move data in between systems. So it's not a, it's like how fast you can do it. Insourcing specialist payroll skills. I think there's been a couple of conversations around that. Can you get the skills you need, right? That's the question in the future. And what is it going to take to acquire those skills as an organization, to retain those skills as an organization, and where do we make those people work, right? I mean, I think succession and planning and all of those things are top of mind, and it's going to start to weigh in on companies at all levels, not just in the payroll area, but everywhere where people have talent and succession. And then understanding that risk mitigation and scalability, now that companies are starting again to think about what is business post-COVID, and I want to get back out there, I need to acquire and spin off businesses. What's the fastest and most agile way for me to do that? And so bringing in companies that can help them do that or outsourcing their operations seems to make sense in some cases.
If I have to add, Marion, to this, or let's say emphasis a bit, in most of the companies that I'm talking to and talk about what they are aiming for in the next 2-3 years in terms of from a payroll perspective, then most of the time the words that comes along is about, can we standardize and streamline further? Because that's the top one that everybody talks about, and also realize how difficult it is to do that on a global scale, given the complexity that we're facing. And the other thing is digitalization and automation. Those are the two major themes that I see that most of the organizations take as a mitigation strategy to overcome the payroll complexity. So it's interesting to see how that's going to evolve this year and next year on that.
There's a lot of great comments in the chat about, again, sort of echoing the points we're making about, I love this one about the payroll ecosystem. Again, it's just more than, you know, a paycheck or a pay result, right? It is the whole ecosystem around payroll and what's happening there. So JP, you know, we talked about the survey is actually a twofold survey. We've done the SME part internally. We're now going to be making that survey available. If you could just talk a little bit about some of the impacts of, you know, for future global payroll and share some of the insights and things we've seen already from sharing this, from some of the corporate responses we've gotten in already. Well, the survey will be open a little bit longer, but could you share a little bit of that? And I would just encourage any comments or questions in the chat, because it seems it's great participation. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, and we for sure will touch on that as well. So if we take a look from another angle, Melanie, and if you can,
So, one more, Mel. Yeah,
so
thanks.
one of the we of course also, as the second part of the research, moved out and looked out to the corporate enterprises and to the experts there, and I will not touch on all the details because we are still in the process of collecting all the data and closing up the research. But the interesting is that quite a lot of them have still many or at least more than 10 different payroll vendors to work with. And I've seen for the last 2-3 years quite a trend that people try to bring that down, but still you see a lot of people are still there to work with in an even more complex environment. Thanks. And if you take a look in terms of measuring the execution of payroll and how we deliver as a community to the business and to the employees, then we see that still a significant part do not really track the performance of payroll, which is, I think, one of the key reasons is that, honestly, and I hear it quite a lot, is to say, I'm happy when the month is done and we have paid everybody and we are done and we close in the reporting. I don't see the time to also look at how we actually done as an organization. And one of the key requirements that in order to do that is, of course, that you have a proper dashboard available that helps you to drive that. The other side is that you also see that those organizations that do have an in-source strategy do not want to outsource either. As you can see that clearly, that doesn't change really. If you have as an organization an in-house strategy, then you like to keep it. Now, what I do see, and I'm curious about how that is going to come out of the research, is that what you see organizations doing more and more, making distinctions between delivering the service and using a platform. So what you do see is that they go more and more for a SaaS cloud solution to deliver their internal payrolls. And the other side of the house, you see that most of the organizations, I should say, limited organization, outsource everything. Quite a lot of people that outsource are looking much more from a hybrid model perspective. So some organizations will be done by themselves, or some countries or markets, and some will be outsourced, and they will have a mix of that. The other one and the last one to share from my perspective, which I think was pretty interesting, is that over 40% have been fined in the last 5 years. And to me, if you talk about quite often that people find it, global payroll managers find it very difficult to have a business case on improving the payroll because it's not broken. Why would you change it? But I'm not sure if everybody realizes sometimes how much money goes through the fines that needs to be paid because of not being compliant in end-to-end. So I was struck by the high level of percentage that has been facing fines in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
So,
two fines I'll add to that. So the one on the outsourcing, I think a lot of companies, we've touched on this, said, listen, we made it through COVID. That's great. I'm going to never do this again. And they're seeing increasing challenges getting people to come back into the office. So they know they're going to be set up for more challenges in that regard. The other thing is that if we don't turn that corner, we should have done an informal survey and asked folks about the back in the office posture. If we don't get people back in the office, jurisdictions are going to be stressed for revenue, tax revenues that may be based on where people work. And so you're going to start to see agencies take more advantage of penalties, right? And taking these revenues from penalties. So it's something that folks will have to pay attention, and we're already seeing a little bit out there around that. So something where they may have turned an eye to it in the past, but we will, you may see this increase in the future.
yeah.
So anyway, some last comments around the survey. Will it be shared? I assume it will be, Mel. We'll send that out to folks. And then on just the very last page, if you would, we are sending a link to the survey. We would ask everyone to please weigh in. Appreciate their time today in giving your participation in the poll questions. But if you would, participate in our company payroll complexity survey, we'll be taking those results over the next couple of months, and our target is to issue the report at the end of Q3. So it's been And JP, any final? I just want to say thank everyone's participation, and thanks to the teams in our in-house that put this together year over year with such insightful and pristine results. So thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. I think we have a bit of time left, so I'm not sure if we want to
we do.
add some questions by the team. Because I saw some interesting.
I was going to say, Marianne, you said you wanted to do like an unofficial poll. If you want to, you can ask people to add it to chat if you did want to ask a question about.
It would be interesting. Yeah, if you did, it'd just be interesting because looking at it from a payroll perspective. I know people had to work, but where are people on the work at home versus hybrid environment? It's just this conversation that just doesn't want to, go away, right? People are really entrenched in, I'm not ever going back into the office. You don't have to go back in the office. And I think this idea that, yes, we proved that we could do it, but the question is, should we do it long term? Not only for talent reasons, but all kinds of reasons, right? So I don't know if you can even set that a hybrid for employees, hybrid. See, it's hybrid. Yeah,
I wondered whether I could quickly set one up. I think if you can put it on the chat, then
it's so interesting about that because I think being a parent of a millennial, I'm not sure we're ever getting them all back in the office. I want to be hybrid at most.
Marianne, apparently it's our generation that aren't back to work.
We were raised in the office and we feel like we should go back in the office, but no, not our own kids are saying no.
I think from that I was lucky, Marianne. I've been pushed out of the office for the last 20 years, so that helps a lot in your appreciation of a hybrid model already, to say fairly. But basically, on the response in the chat, it is, I would say, hybrid wins all over, and I think that's interesting to see, because I think that is the model for the future, and that means also the way we have to think about. Collaborating in the process, the way we think about modernizing, it has to be based on the fact that people are going to work in a hybrid environment. And I think so. The other question that I would raise, if possible, still is we always talk about shortage of skills and shortage of experts. So I'm also very curious to see if we as a payroll community feels that we do not have or find enough experts around the different countries that we work in to help and to participate in this payroll process. I'm really curious to see if that is a shared view, or that it is just made up by myself or others, that we have a short of talent for the payroll industry. Really curious about your views on that.
And I just say from our perspective, from the GPA perspective, I think there is a worry. Every country I visit, there's a worry that there's a lack of talent in the payroll industry and where the talent's going to come. And I think with COVID as well, one of the issues where there was great talent that had just said, you know what, I'm near retirement age, you know, and I'm going to retire a few years earlier than anticipated. So you've got the loss of, you know, some really amazing skills due to people just retiring or leaving the industry early. And then also where are we going to get the new generation in? So that's a big topic for us actually at the GPA.
Yeah,
It's for every company, right? And I think the payroll industry for sure. I love the comments. I have to go to the office for my sanity. I like that. But you know, you're right. I mean, I do think from a talent perspective, there's something, you know, coming up in the payroll business, you know, sitting there watching somebody reconcile a payroll and to make sure it gets out the door. I mean, yeah, there's some, you learned a lot there, right?
yeah. So the interesting piece I see, and that's only from this year, I have to say fairly, that I have been talking to a few company, larger enterprises, so around 60, 70,000 people that had the tradition to do payroll themselves. Always, they never outsourced, and of course they engage themselves with industry because they want to benchmark on a regular basis if they are still doing a great job. And every time they came to the same conclusion, we're still good, we can do it all themselves. This time they came back to our market again, and the only reason why they will pursue today in changing their sourcing model is because their view was we don't anymore can rely on having enough skills and people and experts available to run our payroll in countries around the globe. So this is going to become a more and more, I think, key topic as we move forward.
Yeah, Mel, you're on the right topic. You can see that from the comments, right? The whole talent, benchmarking, salaries, how do we get this talent? So I think if we assume that the foregone conclusion is we're never going back to the office, it's going to be hybrid, then how do we deal with it? Because talent in the payroll space was difficult before. So now what do we do going forward? Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw a comment here from Sarah that says, "Hey, we thought about increasing the salaries for the payroll experts, but we decided not to do so, and that is not helping indeed. But at the same time, yes, indeed, if you talk about getting talent, you might want to take a little different approach and say, okay, how do we do that from a slightly different angle? And but sometimes you'd have to take the shortcut and say, hey, let's get that better paid and let them keep on work. But yes, I can see on the responses that it is definitely a topic that resonates with the audience here as well.
Maybe that's the next webinar, but I do have a question. So you mentioned that France is the most complex country, but what makes countries like Germany, Switzerland so complex?
So let me start with Switzerland, because that's the funny one, I think. One of the things, they are kind of strongly regulated, that's one side, and the regulation is quite often by canton, by area, and they have a lot of them, and they are pretty different, and some of the reporting also needs to be done very specifically. But also what you see, I see, is that the works councils as well, the unions, are pretty strong and very complex, and very detailed agreements has been put in place, and with a long history. And that makes quite often, at least the clients that I have been working with, an incredible complex set of rules. So history of an agreements, strong unions, strong works councils. That makes it pretty complex.
And then, oh, sorry, Marianne.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's another question here. It says, from your perspective, what do you think could be the best digital support to manage global payrolls who outsource the payroll for many countries?
That's a I think a great question. If you take one step back and you start with the basics, and that sounds, let's say, I would nearly say foolish, but if the integration between your core HR system and your payroll is not complete, dynamic, and accurate, you are facing as a payroll team a lot of rework to be done. And it is underestimated how important it is that integration is with timestamps is complete, rich of data, and able to have change on an employee level. If we talk to customers that most of them start off, oh, I have already integration with my payroll system in a country, and they go like, okay, but then you start to deeper dive and you see how many manual interventions needs to happen to make that integration complete. You are surprised. And so I think one of the key starting points is you need to have a flawless integration without manual intervention between your core HR and your payroll environment. And that is, I think, that is a key challenge for a lot of organizations, larger, medium, and small organizations. And as I see, having data complete, and if you think about additional data that you need to get outside your core HR system, that's the other side that you see a lot of complexity coming in. So for example, if you are integrating with a time and attendance system and you upload that file and all the records are going to be rejected because there's only one mistake in the whole file, then that doesn't help in the process. And many integrations are designed like that. Is it all good or not all good? That doesn't help. So that integration that you can say, hey, of those 1,000 records, 999 are good, the only one that is not good needs to be corrected, then, but the rest can pass. That makes it much more rich. So I think the level of integration, the completeness of that would be the first thing to get to. So Marianne, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say the one thing I would add to that is the level of integration. And then, you know, we've talked about it for a long time. You and I laugh when we talk about touchless payroll. We're like, there's no such thing. But yes, that direction towards touchless, anomaly detection, AI, real-time payroll results. You know, stop waiting for payroll week. Like, be looking at the results before that. So when we get to the final payroll cutoffs, it's just one more run. So this idea that you're seeing more and more of this in the cloud payroll systems, the ability to bring that out there. So it's coupling good integration, AI, and anomaly detection right into almost a simultaneous real-time payroll runs. Yep, that's where we got to get. And I think we're all saying that because if we're going to have challenges with personnel, we got to reduce the reliance on the personnel to do all that manual work and have the systems bring the smarts to do it for us.
Yeah. Okay. So
complex. Now, we're not saying that we don't want to do this index again, but let's see how we can get technology to enable us to drive the complexity way down, right?
Okay, so we're coming to an end. Thank you so much. Before we leave, is there anything else, JP or Marianne, that you'd like to add at all?
Not to add, only to thank you, Melanie, for the opportunity to share the Global Payroll Complexity Index with the team here, and thanks to the team listening in and interacting with us through the chat. That was absolutely a marvelous experience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. See you all soon. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.